Is God sending us indications that the fall feasts that are about to take place are going to be very important? I think he might be. I think he might be. And I think we need to be ready for that. But we also need to be ready for if it doesn't happen, that we misread it or it was a coincidence or we were being tested. We have to be ready for everything. But the evidence that he may be taking his giant divine yellow marker and circling the fall feasts for 2024, hard to ignore. I mean, it's hard to ignore, and we want to talk about that. But we have to have a high confidence level that we can know when the fall feasts really are. Because you hear a lot of chatter out there about that. Oh, the Hebrew calendar is a month off, and so we got to take the month of Tishrei, those events, and move it a month away. Every time someone says something like that, they're revealing that they really don't know the system God used to determine the 7 feasts that he gave Moses. The process and the program and the instructions that he gave Moses, they run independent of all calendars that have ever existed. You do not need a calendar to know the dates of his appointed times, of his 7 feasts, because it's completely running on its own track, regardless of what the world is doing. God told Moses, on the month of Abib, or Aviv, as we typically call it today, I brought you out of Egypt. And on the 14th, at sunset of that month, you will celebrate Passover until the next day, the sunset on the 15th day, sundown. And the day after that, it will be Feast of Unleavened Bread, immediately followed by Feast of First Fruits. And then 50 days later will be Pentecost. And then we'll talk about the fall feast in just a moment. But all man had to do was to recognize, well, what's the first day of Abib or Aviv? Now called, that month is now called Nisan or Nisan. I've heard it all kinds of ways. I'm going to go with, what the heck, Nisan. But that's the first month of the festival calendar. All months always begin on a new moon. All man had to do, one little job God gave him, and it involved the barley, determining the Aviv. Aviv means literally the young head of grain. The month is for that. It is to begin the harvests. And the first harvest is barley. And so you weren't to begin the month of Aviv until the barley reached a certain stage, the stage being Aviv, where it's almost ready to be harvested, but not quite. This website really, I think, says it very well and very succinctly. Since Abib, or Aviv, if you'd rather, since Abib refers to young grain, i.e. barley, this is what we use to mark the first biblical month. Strictly speaking, Abib describes the stage of barley that is within the dough stage or later. Also, since the Bible confirms that the barley precedes the new moon crescent, you must have barley that meets the minimum stage of Abib or Aviv by the new moon crescent. So the month doesn't tell the barley what to do. Barley will tell us when to make the next new moon the month of Aviv, now called Nisan. You check the barley. Is it ready? Is it almost ready for harvest? There's more to it than just that, but that's the really, in a general way of speaking, that's what you're looking for. If you say, yes, it is, and probably the Sanhedrin made the decision, possibly the priests back in the day, this is exactly how it was done in Jesus' day. Someone says with authority, Aviv has been declared. The next new moon is therefore the month of Aviv, and that new moon will be the first day. Once you acknowledge and point to that first day, all 7 feasts are now locked into place, It doesn't matter what the world does at that point. Doesn't matter at all. They can add a month, they can remove a month. You're going to count days and new moons, and that's it. That's it. It's that simple. Here's what the New Unger's Christian Dictionary says about this process. And this is all leading to an important point, by the way. The months began with the new moon, but the first month was fixed after the Exodus and by the necessities of the Passover, by the ripening of the earliest grain, namely barley. That's all man had to do. And in an agrarian society, that should have been pretty simple. Look at the barley. Is it close to being harvesting time for the barley? Then the next new moon is that first month, Aviv or Abib. Tel Aviv is named after that. Tel means mound. Mound of Aviv. It's probably where they went to check the barley. And then the feasts run out on their own tracks. You don't need any calendars. Here's what God says about the fall feasts. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel, saying, in the seventh month, and he's talking about from the first month, being the new moon of Aviv, in the seventh month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe a day of solemn rest, a memorial proclaimed with blasts of trumpets, a holy convocation. That's Feast of Trumpets. And then he goes on to say, on the 10th day of that seventh month will be Day of Atonement, beginning at sunset. And on the 15th day of that month, beginning at sunset, will be Feast of Tabernacles. So once you set that very first new moon day of Aviv, after you've checked the barley, you simply count new moons. Don't let anybody tell you, we don't know when. Yes, you do. As long as you do the prescribed process, which involves checking the barley. That's how he uses it. He uses an agricultural event and new moons. And that's it. It's brilliant. Even if you somehow messed it up one year, next year you correct and you're back on schedule. You can never completely mess it up. It's brilliant. And mankind cannot interfere with it. Now, according to the Hebrew calendar, when you go to the internet and you Google, when are the Jewish feasts in 2024? It's going to show you when they happen according to the Hebrew calendar. The problem with the Hebrew calendar is they don't follow Aviv. Following Aviv, checking on the barley, went away when the diaspora of 70 AD took place, when they were sent out into all the nations. They were no longer in Israel. They could no longer check the barley crop in Israel. And so what they began to do at that point, and they didn't want to forget the feast days, so they said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to call the first new moon after the spring equinox happens, Aviv or Nisan. That will be the first day. And then the feasts roll out from that point. They still do that to this day. When they went back to the land, they should have re-begun the process of Aviv, but they didn't because it's an inconvenience. If they get rid of it, then they can post the dates for the feast years in advance and people can make travel plans. If you use Aviv, you won't know until a few days beforehand. Is the next new moon going to be it? And then they declare, yes, it is. And now all of a sudden you've got to scurry around and make your travel plans. So it's just easier to do it that way. And that's what they did this year. Having said that, the fact of the matter is there's really only 2 possible new moons each year that Aviv can begin on. It's either going to begin on the new moon right before the spring equinox or right after the spring equinox, because barley is harvested in early spring. So those are really going to be your 2 choices in any normal weather year. If you have an extreme, a really extreme year, it might be some variation. But if it's a normal year, just by guessing one of those 2 is going to be correct. What we want to know is, was the Hebrew calendar correct this year? Fortunately, there are people in Israel who do observe Aviv, and they go out into the barley fields and check. Now, not a whole bunch of people, but there are quite a few. And when I went to various websites, there was a consensus that agrees with the Hebrew calendar this year. The Hebrew calendar this year says this new moon, April 8th. That's the new moon immediately following the spring equinox. Turns out to be the correct one. It was either going to be this new moon or the one on March 10th. That seems to be way early to call Aviv, way early. And the consensus was it was too early. There's a woman in that community who lives in Israel who's been doing this for 25 years. She has a very good reputation, Deborah, of Deborah's Date Tree, Facebook and YouTube channel. She goes out, has been doing this for years, and checks the barley. She uses a high degree of accuracy. She too agrees that the first day of the festival calendar year began on April 8th. The reason I brought all of that up and took the time to do that is so that we can, two reasons, know that we can know. We can know when the fall feasts begin this year, based on the fact that Aviv was performed in the nation of Israel, and we have really good consensus coming out of there that April 8th was the beginning. The second reason I brought it up was something important happened on April 8th. And the question is, did God intend for that to happen on April 8th? Or was it a coincidence? Because if he intended for that to happen on April 8th, the first day of the festival calendar, then he's saying, pay special attention to this year's feasts for whatever reason. He's calling them out if he's the one that intended the event. Do you recall what the event was? I missed it when this was happening. But now I know. It was the Great American Eclipse that took place on April 8th. And people are starting to kind of talk about that now. Wait. The first day on that new moon, we had the biggest eclipse in history, the most watched eclipse in history. Maybe there's something about this year's feast calendar that we need to pay extra close attention to. And I don't think those folks really understand there's another layer of depth beneath all of that. Because the Great American Eclipse of April 8th of this year was really the Great American Eclipse 2. Great American Eclipse 1 was 7 years ago on 2017, the month of August, 1 month before the Revelation 12 sign. Its companion eclipse shows up this year on the first day of the festival calendar in the year of the 7th anniversary of the Revelation 12 sign. That's fairly ominous. However, let me point this out, something else I didn't know until this week doing the research on this. Did you know that solar eclipses, which is what took place on April 8th, only ever happen on new moons? Did you know that? I didn't know that. You know who I bet did know that? My sister. I bet if I asked her right now, did you know that solar eclipses only happen on new moons? She'd say, yeah, I knew that. Of course you didn't know that? You didn't know that? No, I didn't know that. They only happen on new moons. I knew that lunar eclipses only happen on full moons, but solar eclipses only happen on new moons. And since the first day of the festival calendar will always be on a new moon, it occasionally is going to get a solar eclipse. It's still going to be rare, but it is going to happen. So is this a coincidence or was it intended? If it was intended, it means something. If it's a coincidence, it's a coincidence. So based on that, I want more evidence. If God is pointing to these feasts and specifically to the fall feast, and there is more, quite a bit more to chew on. So let's count those 7 new moons, beginning with April 8th being moon 1, new moon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. October 2nd, the new moon. And we go to the Hebrew calendar, and yes, they agree that's Feast of Trumpets. And again, the Hebrew calendar is correct this year because they guessed right about April 8th. If they had guessed wrong, they would be off. We don't care about the Hebrew calendar. We can do it without any calendar. October 2nd is the seventh new moon from that first new moon of April 8th, 2024. Do you know what's going to happen on that new moon? Another solar eclipse. Now think about it, folks. There are only two solar eclipses this year. Only two. That's not many. One of them was on April 8th, the first day of the festival calendar. The second one, the only other solar eclipse, is on the first day of the fall feast, on the first day of Feast of Trumpets. In the seventh year of the Revelation 12 sign, two solar eclipses on these two very important, potentially important dates. Isn't that something? My level of interest increased when I saw that. I was going, wait a minute. That's kind of interesting, given that this is the seventh anniversary year of the Revelation 12 sign. Two solar eclipses on meaningful days, pointing to what appears to me the fall feasts. That looks important, but there's more. Do you know what else is going to be happening on that day? What astronomers are calling the comet of the century. This one. You see that? They've always got to stick a demonic name on it. That comet is very interesting. The reason it's being called the comet of the century is because of its brightness. They're expecting it to be at least as bright as Halley's comet, which is brighter than the stars. It has a unique tail and all of that, but here's what's really unique about it. It runs on an 80,000 year circuit. This is the first time anyone has ever seen it, and it shows up right before the fall feast and runs through the fall feast. It will be visible throughout the fall feast, trumpets, Day of Atonement, and tabernacles. I think there are a couple of days where it goes behind the sun, but other than that, it will be visible throughout the fall feast. It won't be visible until I think it's September 27th. So it shows up after 80,000 years working its way to Earth right before the fall feast this year, in which two solar eclipses appear on the first day of the feast calendar and on the first day of the fall feast. In the seventh year of the Revelation 12 sign, we're going to have a solar eclipse that day and the comet of the century taking place that day. And it will roll throughout the entirety of the fall feasts. Its closest approach will be on the Day of Atonement, the 12th. The Day of Atonement begins at sundown on the 11th and runs through the 12th until sundown. So the closest approach of that comet, if that means anything, is Day of Atonement. Some people are saying it will be at its brightest, though, on October 2nd. They're not sure. I'm not sure any of that matters. I think just having it in the sky matters, along with a solar eclipse. But wait, as they say, there's more. Do you remember we talked a few videos ago about the Blaze star? What NASA is calling a once-in-a-lifetime event, that star that's about to go nova, and no one has ever seen that. Novas happen throughout the cosmos every year, but one that's visible with the naked eye from Earth, oh, that's rare. That's rare. And they were saying if you want to see a nova, an exploding star, this is the year. It's finally arrived. And people in the astronomical community have been waiting decades for this. They knew it was coming, and it arrives this year. They told us that star was supposed to explode before September, and yet it hasn't. They're still waiting. We're deep into September, and we're waiting. Can you imagine if that star explodes a few days before October 2nd? After it explodes, it will be visible for 7 days. And suddenly, on that day, a solar eclipse, the comet called Comet of the Century, and an exploding star, a star that just went nova. Even if it doesn't go nova by the 2nd, if it goes nova anytime during the fall feast, it has to be meaningful, These can't all be coincidences. That's why I asked this AI image generator, give me a solar eclipse, give me a comet, and give me an exploding star. It went overboard with the exploding star. It's not going to look that dramatic. And the solar eclipse is best seen, I think, from South America. So when the sky goes dark a little bit, you might see, besides the solar eclipse, this comet and this exploding star. Wouldn't that be something? The bad thing is, do you know how few people there are in this country and around the world who are keeping awake, watching for these things, and listening to the Lord about His day, about His coming, and how to prepare for it, and what to expect on that day, and all of that? Not many. So there's a lot of people watching these things and taking interest, and they are not paying attention to the Lord. They still do not know the kind of day that is coming. At the end of this video, right here, I still have to bring up that rapture dream from Pastor Carl Gallups. He and two other people, unbeknownst to all three, had the exact same dream. And in that dream, it starts out with all three saying, I'm standing in a field at night looking at the stars. Behind me is a city. I'm not allowed to turn around and look. I'm looking at the stars. And then the stars start falling from heaven, which they weren't expecting. And suddenly there's an angel at their side, and suddenly they're gone. But there's complete trauma on the world. Once again, that dream is indicating those people went outside of town to get a good view of heaven, of the stars, because there was something going on that night. That's my take on it. That's what I believe is going on in those dreams. And certainly a nova would fulfill the need to go outside of town to see it. Certainly the comet of the century would also make you want to drive outside of town and look at the stars. When both are in the same sky, imagine the number of people who will be driving out of town to see that. And you'll have 7 days to see both a comet and a star that is exploding, if it explodes just before October or anytime during October. With or without the exploding star, there's plenty here to be interested in, but we also manage our disappointment. I'm not going to worry about my disappointment yet, but if these fall feasts come and go and nothing happens, and I'm not talking necessarily about the rapture at all, we're still waiting on that second sign and perhaps indication that war in heaven has begun. Whatever He does during those fall feasts, I'm ready to receive. If He decides not these fall feasts, that's fine. You don't get stubbed up. He said, what I say to you, I say to all. The church, for whatever reason, doesn't believe it's all. They believe they have the right to take that advice from our Lord and shove it aside. I don't. We're all. And He says, watch. That word can also be translated, stay awake, for the very things we're talking about in this video. God bless you.